Saba had an influence on Abi Dharr. Now listen to this. How can a person who just became a Muslim very recently in the time of Uthman have an influence on Abi Dharr, who had become a Muslim a generation or two before him? It seems we are dealing here with information that has to be scrutinized. This information cannot be taken at face value. And so they also continue to tell us that he was the one who influenced Abu Dharr to read the meanings of the Quran as an opposition to those who have wealth and those who have power. As if Abu Dharr himself didn't have enough information to understand the meanings of the Quran, and he needed this type of upstart personality to come and tell him what the meanings of the Quran are. And then they tell us that he also met, meaning Ibn Saba, this borderline character, met Ubadah ibn As-Samit, who took him to Muawiyah, and they had an exchange, after which Muawiyah expelled this person from Asham. So where does he go now? Now he goes to Egypt. And these books tell us in Egypt he found resonance with what he is saying. People began to listen to him because this guy is advocating revolution or a change of governors in Al-Madinah, or what is called in today's time a type of military coup that will unseat those who are ruling in Al-Madinah and come up with better rulers. And these books continue to tell us that Ibn Saba was telling the Muslims that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is more worthy of returning to life than Isa ibn Maryam. Because in our Islamic concept, we have the return of Isa ibn Maryam to the world. He said, no, but Muhammad is more worthy of this return than Isa. And he quotes an ayah. He says, and listen to this, you talk about quoting ayat out of context or quoting ayat to serve some immediate objective. He quotes the ayah, إن الذي فرض عليك القرآن لرادك إلى معاد. Certainly he who has mandated the Quran upon you, O Muhammad, will have you return for an encore, meaning to do this all over again. And he began to preach that every Nabi has a wasi, and the Prophet, being the Nabi, had Ali as his wasi. And just like the Prophet was the last of the Anbiya, and so was Ali the last of the Awsiya. We should mention here, because obviously you're not the one who's going through this type of digging up this information, we should mention that there are two very important, if not the most important references, historical references on that time period. A book written by Ibn Sa'd called At-Tabaqat, and a book written by Al-Baladhuri called Ashraf Al-Ansab. These two books, especially the latter one by Al-Baladhuri, that goes into the nitty-gritty details of that time period, never mentions this character Ibn Saba. And Ibn Sa'd also doesn't mention him. The area that needs our investigation, our meaning, not just a few scattered, semi-silent scholars, meaning you and me, the thinking Muslim. The area that needs our attention is the fact that At-Tabari, who is another well-known Islamic historian, had mentioned Ibn Saba, relying on a narrative by a person called Sayf ibn Umar. We don't know how reliable this narrative is. We don't know whether we can collect enough investigative information to prove that this channel of historical narrative by At-Tabari on the authority of Sayf ibn Umar are enough to convince us that this person actually existed. It is said in our common books of history that, and we know this as a fact, when we are told that in some of these other lesser history books that have become mainstream and are used by many Muslims, when we are told that Ibn Saba met Aba Dharr and then began to lecture Aba Dharr and to motivate him, then we have a very serious question mark about this whole story and about Ibn Saba himself, because we know Aba Dharr to have committed himself to Allah's Prophet before all of the Ansar. Abu Dharr became a committed Muslim at the beginning of the Islamic mission in Mecca. Abu Dharr was a person who committed the Quran to his heart. Hafiz al-Quran. He was a person who lived the struggle of Islam from its A to its Z, from its beginning years in Mecca to its ending years in Al-Madinah, meaning the Prophet's years. How can anyone tell us, much less how can historians write for us to read, that a person like Abu Dharr was more or less schooled or tutored? This is what some of these history books are telling us. He was schooled or tutored by Abdullah ibn Saba. It's nonsensical.